I'll be your host for today's event. I want to begin by thanking you all for taking the time to be here today. These are unprecedented and extremely challenging times, and I know that Dublin City Council very much appreciates you taking the time to be here today and to participate in this process, particularly at this time. This is your city, and Dublin City Council wants everyone, youth groups, older citizens, businesses, community organisations and local residents to have your say on this city's future. This is the first stage in preparing the new Dublin City Development Plan for 2022 to 2028. And as part of this first stage, a strategic issues paper has been prepared, providing an overview of the key themes and issues and challenges that are likely to be considered as part of this new plan, such as transport, housing, culture, climate action and retail. This webinar is focused on the theme Heritage and Climate Action. And the purpose of this webinar is to provide you with an overview of this theme, to hear about it, to ask questions, and to gather more details before you have your say and make your submission. Now, there may be some of you here today who have already read the strategic issues paper online and may have even submitted your views already, while others here today may be participating in this process for the very first time. Regardless of what your experience is, Dublin City Council's hope is that each and every one of you will log on to the website www.dublincitydevelopmentplan.ie and share your views. You'll see displayed on your screen now the strategic issues paper that you can read on the website. To share your views, simply click Make a Submission, seen here at the bottom of the screen. A submission does not need to be a long report. It can simply be your ideas on how the city can be improved in the future. You can also share your views by post by writing to Development Plan Team, Planning and Property Development Department, Dublin City Council, Wood Quay, Dublin 8. And the public consultation period is open until 4:30 p.m. on February 22nd, 2021. Now, the format for today's webinar is very interactive. We'll be hearing two short presentations on each of the key themes, and then we'll be hosting a live Q&A session with our panel of experts on what's being discussed. And joining us on the panel today is Charles Duggan, Heritage Officer in the Planning and Property Development Department of Dublin City Council, Sabrina Decker, Climate Action Coordinator for Dublin City Council, and John O'Hara, City Planning Officer and Head of Land Use Policy with the Dublin City Council. You're all very welcome. Throughout the presentations today, please feel free to get involved. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see there's a Q&A facility where during the webinar, you can ask questions about the new Dublin City Development Plan. Once the two presentations are complete, the panel will be live to answer your questions, and they will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible here today. We'll now begin with our first presentation. May I introduce Charles Duggan, Heritage Officer in the Planning and Property Development Department of Dublin City Council, and Charles will be discussing the topic of heritage.
Hello, my name is Charles Duggan. I am the Heritage Officer with Dublin City Council. Today I'm giving a short presentation on the Built Heritage and Archaeology section of the Dublin City Development Plan pre-draft public consultation strategic issues paper. The character of Dublin City embodies the imprint of successive generations through a continuous process of construction, erasure, transformation and expansion down to the present day. We have inherited the evidence of this ancient and rich urban legacy in the city's architecture, archaeology and cultural heritage. It is an important and irreplaceable resource which reflects our past and provides the context for our future. The development plan safeguards the heritage of the city for future generations through policies and the implementation of national legislation. In the Built Heritage and Archaeology chapter, it aims to integrate the conservation of our built and archaeological heritage with the planning and development process in order to strike a balance between conservation and development objectives in the interest of proper planning and sustainable development, and to conserve, protect and enhance the built heritage and archaeology of the city in order to contribute to our overall quality of life and livability. Our archaeological heritage includes all the material remains of past societies and cultures that survive above and below ground and underwater. Dublin has a recorded history of human settlement of over 9,000 years, centred along the line of the River Liffey. While there are few upstanding monuments in the city centre, beneath the surface is a rich and complex record of human activity. The upstanding monuments that do survive include the city walls, several castles, churches and graveyards, and even the quay walls. The city also has a deep buried archaeological deposits. To date, over 2,000 archaeological excavations have taken place in Dublin, leading to some remarkable discoveries, including, more recently, a 12th century slate with graffiti found during excavations in 2019, and on a site in the Coombe, and remains of an 11th century dwelling on Ainger Street, which has been preserved in situ for future generations under the direction of the City Council's Archaeology Office. The archaeology of the city is protected under the National Monuments legislation and is safeguarded and managed for the future through the planning process. The legislation identifies recorded monuments which are sites, structures, and features of archaeological significance, such as the previously mentioned City Wall Circuit, and also national monuments in state care, such as Casino Marino, Kilmainham Jail, and Stephen's Green. There is also the Zone of Archaeological Interest, which provides for the protection of the historic core of the city. Our built heritage includes all the buildings, structures, and urban settlements, both the everyday vernacular and the architectural design that are of our historic, archaeological, artistic, cultural, scientific, technical, and social interest. Our built heritage includes both buildings that are protected and not protected, as well as sites of potential value or a group of buildings and sites of historic, architectural, or cultural value. In the development plan, statutory protection extends to over 8,220 structures across the city and suburbs. Our major 18th century and 19th century public buildings and complexes, many of our Georgian townhouses and houses in the Victorian suburbs, as well as cultural, commercial and retail buildings, churches, train stations and bridges, and our industrial heritage are all examples of building types which are protected in the city. And there are a growing number of pre-Georgian structures and buildings from the mid-20th century being identified that deepen and broaden what we need to value and care for. And there are 23 designated architectural conservation areas in the city. And ACAs are areas which are considered to be of special architectural, historical, archaeological, artistic, cultural, scientific, social or technical interest, or areas that are important to the environment of a protected structure. In Dublin City, such areas include the historic village of Chapel Izzard, Georgian squares like Fitzwilliam Square and Montrose Square, and suburban residential streets such as Haddon Road and Victoria Road in Clontarf. In recent weeks, North Great George's Street and environs, one of the city's most beautiful Georgian streetscapes, was designated an ACA. Through the City Heritage Plan, a separate non-statutory document, which will be updated this year, we will look at new ways to research, support and manage the city's cultural heritage and identify opportunities to engage communities across the city and suburbs with our built environment, our archaeological monuments and our intangible cultural heritage. Important recent initiatives include the Study of 20th Century Architecture, published in More Than Concrete Blocks Volumes 1 and 2, and the opening of 14 Henrietta Street, which explores the lives of those who lived on the street over 3 centuries from its 18th century beginnings to its long period of tenement occupation. Through the Heritage Plan, we will continue to document aspects of our city's built and archaeological heritage and continue to develop and update useful online resources, provide public access to high quality information about the heritage of the city and suburbs, such as the County Dublin Archaeology GIS and the Dublin City Industrial Heritage Record, which are both available on open access on heritagemaps.ie. Appreciation of our heritage has grown significantly in the last year. The restrictions we have all experienced arising from COVID-19 pandemic has meant that we all got to know where we live a little better. In this crisis, we have found new opportunities to experience and learn about our local heritage, and we will continue to deepen the appreciation of the city's heritage through different means of media, including temporary and permanent exhibitions, publications, online lecture series, both online and offline. Our rich and complex archaeological and built heritage contributes to the city's character and to our shared identity and sense of place. It forms a unique asset for Dublin's social, cultural and economic development and contributes to our well-being and to our quality of life. We encourage you to read Theme 8, Archaeology and Built Heritage, along with the other themes in the pre-draft consultation and strategic issues paper, and to have your say now and throughout the various stages of the consultation process. Right now, we're looking for your input on the broad big picture issues affecting the authenticity and integrity of the city's archaeology and built heritage, which have been identified in the issues paper. I will leave you with some important resources of information on the city's built and archaeological heritage, which we hope will help you in this endeavour. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, and lots of great questions being shared there throughout that presentation. Keep them coming in and we'll get to them shortly at the Q&A session. Just to remind you, if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so through the Q&A facility seen here on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, our second and final speaker today is Sabrina Decker, Climate Action Coordinator for Dublin City Council, and Sabrina will be looking at the topic of climate action.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this workshop on climate change and the forthcoming Dublin City Development Plan. My name is Sabrina Decker, and I am the Climate Action Coordinator for Dublin City Council, and I am responsible for the implementation of DCC's Climate Action Plan, which I will tell you more about shortly. This presentation will be a broad overview of climate change responses, DCC's Climate Change Action Plan, and how planning can address climate change. Let's begin. By now, I think many of us are familiar with the science and know that climate change is caused by human activities that release CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, resulting in climate change impacts such as the ones that are and will be experienced in Dublin, which include flooding, sea level rise, drought, urban heat island, extreme weather events. On this slide, I have a figure that can be found in the Climate Change Action Plan. It is a timeline of weather events beginning in 1986 through to 2018. What is noticeable in this timeline is that the increasing of frequency of events in the last decade. So from 2010 to 2018, we can see an increase in the number of events. I had wanted to include another figure in this slide that was recently released by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, in the US. It is a graph of the hurricane season over the last 50 years. Most notably in 2020, which was not only a year of lockdowns and is tied currently for being the hottest year on record, there was also 30 storms in the Atlantic during the hurricane season. The graph also illustrates the other challenges with climate change, that the frequency and intensity and duration of these events will only increase. Further, that these events will not also be standalone, that their impacts will be compounded, as will our risk and vulnerability to them. It will not just be a rainfall event or a heat wave or a flood. As an example, and one that perhaps isn't considered enough in an urban context, is the compound and interconnected impacts of droughts, heat waves, and rainfall. We've experienced droughts and heat waves in Ireland, notably in the last 3 summers. Droughts impact on soil, moisture, and consequently the ability to grow food. Then, when there is a rainfall event, if it is too intense, there is a risk of soil erosion and flooding due to the soil not being able to retain the water. This is a simple example, but the impacts are interconnected, and we need to be cognizant of this when we respond. So how do we respond? Historically, it has been through mitigations measures, which focus on the prevention and reduction of GHG emissions into the atmosphere. This has been achieved through energy retrofits, energy efficiency measures, promotion of active travel and public transport, as well as waste reduction, which you can see in the figure. Adaptation is responding and preparing for the impacts of climate change. It is about building our resilience to climate change by preparing for predicted impacts, such as flooding, heat waves, cold snaps, as well as droughts. Actions in adaptation can be categorized as soft measures, which are focused on behavior change and awareness raising. A good example of this is information provided by the Office of Public Works on being winter ready and preparing and protecting your home from a flood event or a storm. Green-blue infrastructure measures are another category. These are measures that can use nature to build resilience to climate change. Example is this would be green roofs, green walls, and sustainable urban drainage. These measures have multiple benefits in that they cool the city in the summer and provide flood alleviation. Grey infrastructure would be the physical measures such as walls and attenuation tanks, walls that you would see such as those on the Liffey and the South Campshires. As the figure illustrates though, mitigation and adaptation actions are not mutually exclusive. One action, such as greening the city, with the planting of a range of flora, from grass and wildflower to trees, has benefits for energy consumption. It improves health and well-being of citizens. It improves air quality, biodiversity, and water qualities. All of these enable our resilience to climate change. The challenge, of course, with climate action is implementation. So, our climate action plan sets out how DCC is responding to climate change. I would like to emphasize that the current plan is focused on DCC's operations and service delivery. For example, it is focused on reducing emissions related to our buildings, social housing, and our fleet. The plan sets out the actions that DCC will take across 5 thematic areas that are interconnected. The first is energy and buildings. This includes retrofits of social housing and council-owned buildings, district heating, just to name a few. Then there are transport actions. This includes the electrification of Dublin City Council's fleet, supporting our staff in choosing more sustainable modes of transport through projects like our Staff Mobility Hub, and the promotion of active travel around the city. I encourage you to attend tomorrow's workshop with Edel Kennedy to learn more about DCC's sustainable mobility plans. Another category is flood resilience. This includes a range of flood alleviation schemes around the city, as well as flood awareness, as well as sustainable urban drainage plans. Then the next set of actions are nature-based solutions. This includes tree planting, greening strategies, rewilding, biodiversity protection, and addressing invasive species. I also encourage you to attend tomorrow's workshop with Les Moore to learn more about greening the city. Final category is resource management. This includes actions that are focused on reducing waste, increasing recycling, increasing awareness around consumption of resources such as water, as well as food, and supporting the shift to a circular economy. The actions in the plan are related to 4 targets of the plan, which you can also see on the figure. We have a 33% improvement in energy efficiency by 2020, which we have achieved, 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. It's important to note that this will change under the new climate bill. This will increase to an absolute target of 50% reduction by 2030 and to be carbon neutral by 2050. We also have a target to make Dublin a climate resilient region or city, and to actively engage citizens and inform our citizens on climate change. While I have stated that the Climate Action Plan is focused on a remit as a local authority, this upcoming development plan is vital to achieving these targets, as it is focused on the city as a whole. So, many years ago, when I was still a curious student, I read the introductory remarks for a panel on climate change and social determinants of health. The speaker, Luis Halvo, succinctly stated that climate change, urbanization, rural development, agriculture, and food security are intertwined determinants of population health and health equity. This statement highlights that planning plays an important role, if not a critical role, in how we respond to climate change. Through the development plan, we can realize Ireland's targets set out in the National Climate Action Plan 2019, as well as our own, which are aligned, while ensuring that people are able to live healthy and full lives. A few of the key issues for the development plan in relation to climate change are land use and land use change. In particular, land use, which is how we decide to use the land in the city, determines whether we will be resilient to climate change or not. Through the issues paper, you are aware that the plan will have to align with the National Development Plan and the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy, in addition to the National Climate Action Plan. There is a commitment already to sustainable land use and the redevelopment of brownfield sites. Further, under the CAP and the RES, there is a requirement for the identification of decarbonization zones and strategic energy zones. Land use is also linked to economic development. Planning will play a role in how we support the circular economy, which I mentioned earlier, and our transition to a low-carbon future. Also, environment is important too. Planning will play a key role in protecting the health of the environment, which we all depend on for clean air and water. Lastly, planning also plays a critical role in achieving a just transition. While nationally and internationally just transitions have been focused on workers in the fossil fuel sector, it is increasingly evident that cities like Dublin have a role in a just transition. I would highlight from my previous life researching just transitions that the focus on access, equity, and inclusion in just transitions is vital to how we plan a city that is resilient to climate change. In other words, it is the string that ties all the issues together and enables to see how they are interconnected. For example, how access to sustainable transport modes relates to access to housing and relates to access to employment and education opportunities, and how they are interconnected. So to conclude and summarize, a climate resilient Dublin is a city where all citizens have access to their basic needs in 15 minutes. So thank you for listening and joining this workshop, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. And just to remind all of you tuning in today that all of the presentations today, and indeed all of the public consultation webinars that Dublin City Council are hosting this week, will all be available to watch back on the Dublin City Development Plan website. That's www.dublincitydevelopmentplan.ie. Now it is time for our live Q&A session. Taking your questions are our presenters, Sabrina Decker and Charles Duggan, and joining them is John O'Hara, City Planning Officer and Head of Land Use Policy with Dublin City Council. You're all very welcome. Charles, I'll go to you first. A question that came in during your presentation. One of the viewers asked, with the closure of the ESB number 29 museum, can the development plan aspire to a Dublin city-run Georgian house museum on the north side, notwithstanding the tenement house on Henrietta Street? Charles, can you hear me okay?
Charles, you're on mute.
Sorry.
Okay. Did you hear that okay, Charles?
Yes. I think there is definitely a need, now that the ESB house is officially closed and no longer opening, to have a place where you can explore the heritage of Georgian Dublin. 14 Henrietta Street does do that to a degree, but its primary focus is the tenement city. And also the National Museum has a number of exhibitions that relate to kind of the Georgian furniture and 18th century history as well. But all of that said, I do think there is a compelling need for some place in the city, on the north side even, where the history of Georgian Dublin can be explored through its domestic architecture.
Brilliant stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, if I could just add to that,
yeah.
And this is the reason why we're out in the public consultation at this moment with the public. There's an interesting dilemma there, because 2-3 years ago, when the ESB were starting their redevelopment of that area, they brought forward the conversion of that Georgian premises as an exemplar of how you can get return population to the city, how you can convert a single Georgian premise into 3 or 4 apartments, and so it encapsulates the dilemma whether or not we should have, and they're not absolute conflicts either. But one of the aims there was to convert, or to show by good example how you can convert Georgian houses into 3 or 4 apartments. Thanks.
Brilliant stuff. A question here for Sabrina. Can you update us on the status of the tree database, which was supposed to be undertaken by Dublin City Council at some point in the past? Is there any update on that?
You will have to actually ask Les about that tomorrow, but the Parks Department does have the Curio tree map that you can actually enter information about trees in the city. So the most current one we do have is from UCD. I hope that sufficiently answers.
Brilliant. I have another question here for you, Sabrina, actually. Will the draft plan be subject to strategic flood risk assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
Simple. Wow. That was easy.
Simple as. Okay.
Yeah, yes, it will. If I can amplify that, yes, the draft plan and all the way through the plan will be subject to an strategic environmental impact assessment, and an integral part of that will be a strategic flood risk assessment as well. Again, a part of that will be if there are areas of the city where it's considered that there can be some development, say non-residential in some aspects of a floodplain, then there has to be a justification test, and that justification test and the whole strategy will be reviewed as part of this plan, because we have to balance flood risk with the other aspect, which is a compact city, and it's a difficult balance at times, and that's why we'll be reviewing those aspects in the new development plan.
To add to my answer, if the person is interested, the OPW has all the flood maps for the whole country available on floodinginfo.ie or flooding.ie. So there's two websites there that people have to find detailed maps.
Brilliant stuff. Question here, I think John might be best placed to answer it. The question asks, the development plan largely protects heritage through proposed development rather than proactive monitoring. Can the new development plan propose a dedicated enforcement service?
Well, actually, the development plan doesn't propose an operational matter like that, but we do have within the City Council an enforcement section, and there is a conservation enforcement component to that. And as you know, we have 8,700 protected structures in the city, 23 ACAs. It is a mammoth job to protect all of those buildings by day-to-day management. We rely to a large extent on the citizens, the owners and occupiers, to look after their own premises. Secondly, we do have supports by way of investment schemes and funds to help people with things like windproof and re-roofing their protected structures. But in the event that a protected structure is under threat, we have an enforcement section. But part of this whole process here, and part of the engagement of citizens, is that, and as Charles has emphasised there, we need to cherish, and we do cherish, our protected structures, and it is through everybody appreciate them, cherish them, that we hope that enforcement will be an exceptional matter.
Okay, great stuff. There's another question here for the panel. Please comment on the strength of the Thomas Street Architectural Conservation Area. 2 hotels have been given planning permission in the area despite architectural conservation area. Again,
I'll try to answer that.
Yeah.
The Thomas Street is indeed an architectural conservation area. As Charles said, Thomas Street is a very old slee moor out of the city, very important. But the Liberties in the last 2-3 generations has more brownfield areas and vacant lands in other parts of the city. Another part of the development plan was to bring employment in and bring reuse of older buildings into the Thomas Street area. Hotels are part of that, and nobody is saying that hotels are the whole solution or there should be an over concentration of hotels. But hotels have helped to regenerate the Dublin 8 area. They must be, through the development plan, be of good design. They do bring, on an average, a couple of hundred new jobs to any given part of the city, and more than that, they have been developed in brownfield sites that for past maybe 20-30 years in parts of the inner city have been left undeveloped. So hotels aren't all bad, but we have to carefully manage the distribution of hotels particularly within conservation areas as we move forward in the city.
Brilliant stuff. Question here for Charles. The series More Than Concrete Blocks has highlighted the significance of 20th century built heritage. How do we move now to actually protecting this heritage?
Slowly, evidently. I think there's, and we have further work to do, just to say that More Than Concrete Blocks Volume 3 is currently, we're just finishing the last number of case studies for that book, and the editorial phase will begin later in the summer. And we hope to have it out in the first half of next year. And that will bring us from 1974 up to 1999. And yes, the study was aimed at producing really deep research on 20th century architecture, plotting its development from 1900 all the way up, and really trying to situate the much unloved period of the mid-20th century in people's minds as something that is actually part of our heritage. So in my presentation, I mentioned that we're kind of expanding the value of what heritage is, and that includes our 20th century buildings. There have been some successes recently. We have added Hendrons, which that was added I think last year. R&H Hall in Dublin Port, which is one of the largest buildings in Dublin Port, is also now protected. They have the Stella Cinema and the Manor Street Cinema in Stoneybatter. We also have, of course, Bus Ors, which has been protected for quite a while. The Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies was added to the Record of Protected Structures about a year and a half ago. And of course, we have the New Ireland Assurance Company building, which was added. So it's a slow progress, but and it's a difficult ask when it comes to commercial office buildings, because quite often there's major threats or there's major demands on the buildings in terms of reuse, and the argument, we need to kind of fold in the argument about sustainability into keeping particularly our older kind of maybe less bespoke office stock in the city. But this study is about putting the research in place and allowing informed decisions to be made.
Brilliant stuff. Question here for Sabrina. Is there any activities planned in the Climate Action Plan which will involve public participation and citizen science? And could you provide some examples if there are?
There are definitely plans for that post-COVID. We can't right now meet with people in public, and this has kind of been a frustration of my own for in the job, but we're applying for funding for a number of projects that will work with citizens, and we hope to be able to get out there. So we do work with universities. So one project right now that you could probably easily get involved with is there's an air quality project with Francesco Pila in UCD. We'll have one with us that will be looking at food and climate change, and we hope to have that kind of launched in the next few months, hopefully. So that will involve citizen participation. So there's that one. We also hope to have another project a little bit more around kind of, how shall I describe this without giving too much away, because I'm kind of excited about it, but I don't want to get too excited and then not get funding for it. Just about the city, the sounds in the city, transport. Yeah, this is the challenge, is not getting.
Go on, tell us.
About it. Yeah, and then you don't get funding, and then you can't do it. But we hope to still be able to do that project, even if we don't succeed in the European application round. So just keep your fingers crossed for us. But one around kind of noise and transport and biodiversity as well.
It sounds intriguing. We'll definitely keep an eye out for that. Also, Sabrina, on the topic of climate action, question here. Has the council decided already on the location of the decarbonisation zones?
No, we haven't. That's a discussion we're still having about what that is, where it will be. So we'll be discussing with the department more further, especially with the new bill, and with the new minister, he'll want his own climate action plan. So that'll be a discussion with them as well to figure that out.
And again, this is an opportunity for the public to give their comments. Where do they think decarbonisation zone should be? What size do they think should be? And what are the breadth of things that should be considered in a decarb zone? You could have an absolute decarb zone where that could involve the whole city and could involve massive changes in energy consumption, windmills in Dublin Bay, all of the rest. But I think we'd be better to take a graduated approach rather than impose a decarb zone on the whole city. So we need to be thoughtful about this and considered and how we go forward, and that's part of this public consultation process.
I guess the question is, how does a decarbonisation look to you when you're filling out the submission?
Exactly.
Great stuff. Another question here. Again, I think John may be best placed to answer it. Why do we not follow the English model in listed properties? It seems more successful in protecting houses and attracting residents. Now, I don't know what is the English model in listed properties, but this person here is asking, why are we not following that model?
Well, we have a great tradition here of not being proud of following everything that Britain does. We have joined the EU, but from what I understand, the big difference here in the English listed building process is that they have two grades of listed building. So you have the grade 1, which is every part of the building is listed, and that's usually for the top 5 or 10% buildings. And then you have grade 2, which is mainly for the that part of the building that fronts the street, so the chimneys, the railings, etc., etc. And that allows, the grade 2 allows for residents to make changes inside their building, to invest in their, change the floors, whatever, without having to go through the rigorous process of a grade 1 listed building. What people are what's been suggested here is that maybe we could introduce a 2-grade system here in Ireland. So it is worth considering, but the 2000 Planning Act introduced just 1 grade, and that's what we have to work under. But if it's to be changed, it has to be changed at national level. It's not a matter that we can change in the city development plan per se.
Okay. Question here for Sabrina. I think it's actually kind of more nearly a statement than a question, but can the next development plan add the following 3 sentences? Development plan policy will support a carbon neutral approach. Development plan policy will support a fabric first approach, and development plan policy will support net zero carbon buildings. This person is asking, can those 3 sentences be in the next development plan?
I'm going to kind of defer to John on that one.
Well, I think it goes back to what we're saying. Yeah. I think the person, what he or she means is that that would be a useful submission to make, and we'll consider that. We're trying a development plan not to just put statements in that without carrying the public with us, without going through a consultation process. What the other thing that we have to remember, we bring the various aspects of the development plan through our elected members. We have 63 elected members, and it is they who eventually approve the development plan. So those 3 statements, if they're backed up by a bit of thinking, I don't actually know what in depth what they mean at the moment, but that'll be a wonderful submission. We'll consider it, bring it to councillors, and if it's worthy, it'll be in the development plan.
Brilliant stuff. Charles, I think 2 questions here for you. First of all, is there any plan in place to get more people living in the centre of town and inhabiting heritage and older buildings? And is anything happening with Aldborough House on Portland Road in Dublin 1?
Well, the Living Cities initiative is not so much a plan, but it's an incentive scheme to encourage people to live back and to adapt and live in the city centre. There's a designated zone that includes most of the inner city, north and south side, and that scheme is live again until the end of 2022. So there are opportunities to get people to live in the city centre, and folded into that is an opportunity to have a kind of a one-stop shop approach to the kind of planning of that scheme and going through the planning system in a streamlined way that allows you to have access to all the relevant professional officers in the planning process. So that is the principal one. Through the various grant schemes that we have, that is one of the main ways that we have of encouraging people to adapt and to conserve historic buildings, particularly dwellings. But we also have a lecture series that we run each year in partnership with the Irish Georgian Society, which is about sensitively managing your period home. And that course is starting online in March of this year. And again, we encourage people to book those. You can book them from the Irish Georgian Society website in a few weeks' time. And those 11 or 12 talks will continue on until May or June. And they will cover all aspects of building conservation for beginners and people who are looking for a CPD accreditation as well.
Brilliant stuff. And the second question there was just on Aldborough House.
I don't have an update on Aldborough House. Maybe John might, I'm not sure.
No, I don't, and I'd rather not be site-specific in this conversation. We'll just keep it to the policy. Thanks.
Perfect.
Actually, should I just add one thing to what I just said? In 2019, the City Council published a guidance document that looked at how you might subdivide sensitively a Georgian townhouse, and how you might do that meeting the requirements of the building regulations, but also conservation best practice. So that is a very detailed study that looks at a range of building types that would be typical of the kind of layout of your typical townhouse in Dublin across the different periods, and so that guidance again is a way of encouraging people to creating more residences in the city.
Yeah, and might I add to that, both the Live in City initiative and that Georgian adaptation document is on the City Council's website. So it's a great bit of information, and people are welcome to access it.
Brilliant stuff. Question here for John: what legal strength does an architectural conservation area have?
Well, the legal strength is it's part of the development plan. It's a variation of the development plan, and it's when you designate an area as an ACA, it is part of the development plan. So the ACA sets out two things: A, what's to be promoted in the designated area, and secondly, it can change the exempt development. So in an ACA, if it might be exempt development to say put dormers in your roof, well, then that can be de-exempted, or to say typical would be change the fenestration. Normally you can change your windows, but in an ACA, if that right is removed, that is a restriction. So I'd rather not look on an ACA as a negative thing, but ACAs are again a positive thing for the owner-occupiers of properties and those to take pride in them. The other point of an ACA, which is often forgotten, is that it includes the public realm. So there's a responsibility and a duty on the City Council and the other agencies to look after the public realm as well, like street lamps, etc., in an ACA.
Brilliant stuff. For Sabrina, any comment on integrating the 17 Sustainable Development Goals into the plan and vision?
Into the development plan? Yes.
Yeah, it just says any comment. Would you have any comment on integrating the 17 Sustainable Development Goals into the plan and vision?
We do. So we have them integrated into our corporate plan as well, and they're considered in the climate action plan. So by extension, they will be considered in the development plan. Just to consider the Sustainable Development Goals are a framework for considering how we design policy. And it is something we are signed on to, so we do have to.
Brilliant stuff. And while I have you there, Sabrina, another question is, how can we encourage more sustainable building design?
This is quite a challenging one, and I think we were kind of chatting about something to this extent. We can write into the development plan, so similar to the comment that was earlier that made that we can put the policy recommendation forward. We do have to work with the Department of Housing and local government and other stakeholders to consider design and kind of the regulations around what we do. I think the other challenge that we're kind of facing now too is training people in the trade sector to actually enable us to build buildings that are sustainable as well. So we can do lots, but we actually need to think about the whole supply chain in terms of that, from training and education right up to the building and what standard we want to achieve. So that's a very long answer in a weird way.
Brilliant. No, it's perfect.
Can I just add something there about know the two presentations by Charles and Sabrina there? There is a strong link between our built heritage and climate action. There's a whole area of embodied energy of our older buildings are a there's been there for a couple of 100 years. There's no need to threaten them or demolish them. They're sound buildings, and they can accommodate a variety of uses and more population that will bring a more compact city and reduce urban sprawl and all of that. So there is a great benefit in looking after our heritage, but also adapting it, because it's this idea of new and old bottles. There's the best way to look after an older building is if there's somebody living there, they will see whether the slates need repairing or whatever, rather than let them go slowly downhill. So there is a strong link between heritage conservation and reducing our carbon footprint.
And there are multiple examples, John, all around the city of even going back into history of buildings that have been adapted to new uses. There are really very few buildings that are still in their original use. So it's already proven that buildings are resilient by virtue of their adaptability. And our townhouses, to an extent, are eminently adaptable. And just to say that we're facing it now to this is the 30th anniversary of the Temple Bar Group 91 Master Plan, which was one of the first most optimistic things that happened after the depression of the 1980s, where we saw for the first time the regeneration of an urban area. It was shortlisted for the Mies van der Rohe Prize. It involves the intervention of a number of architects who have gone on today to be some of our most important architects working. And most of the buildings they worked on were buildings where they were adapting existing buildings to new, completely different uses. And some of those adaptations were quite decisive and interventionist, and others were extremely sensitive. So we have the likes of the Irish Film Institute and the Arc, but also the Temple Bar Gallery and Studios, which was a shirt factory. We have proven time and time again that our existing building stock, protected or otherwise, is eminently adaptable to new uses.
Yep, good.
Great stuff. And speaking, I suppose, of Temple Bar and music that's there, question here, can you talk about plans to preserve our music culture in Dublin post-COVID? There's very few places for live gigs in Dublin, this person says. For example, they said the Bernard Shaw, District 8, Knockdown.
Again,
John,
yeah, that's the culture and heritage and the character of our city are all intertwined. And yes, it was sad to see the George Bernard Shaw go, but it didn't go. It moved up to Phibsborough. So in a way, like Charles said, the city keeps regenerating itself. Now, there is a concern that the actual places and spaces where culture takes place, whether are gradually being closed in on, and I think it's in the development plan we need to look at maybe using the ground floors of maybe some hotels or whatever could be used for clubs or whatever. It's a thing we could look at, but I'd like to hear again. We'd like to hear from the citizens about how we might keep spaces for retail spaces for cultural events. I have to bear in mind too that they have to be fit for purpose. There's no point in just designating 5% of every hotel to be a place of culture if that's not a reality and it's not viable. So we need to look very closely at this, but it is an important part of the development plan, particularly post-COVID, is how we keep vitality, people moving, people coming to the city centre, particularly if retail is not going to be as physically strong as it was. The evening economy, going out to the theatre, going out to eat to that, and other cultural activities are going to be extremely important in the city, allied to all of those things we've talked about before, about bringing new population into the inner city, into our older buildings. All of that together will create a critical mass that will keep the city centre and the city as a whole and the urban villages alive and yeah, all of those things are interrelated. And I think, as was mentioned earlier this morning, the 15-minute city, part of the 15-minute city is to have cultural places and spaces close to where you live, or at least by good public transport proximity wise. Thanks.
Brilliant. Brilliant stuff. Question here for Charles. Conserving and showcasing in situ the historic sunken floor structure at Ainger Street is a welcome initiative. Are there any plans to continue this approach?
Well, as I said in my presentation, that our archaeological heritage is a finite resource, and even within the existing development plan, there is, preservation in situ is considered to be a really important objective, and it is, the success of Ainger Street was down to our city archaeologist and her interventions, and it's very much something that's going to form part of the next development plan.
Great
yeah,
stuff.
and I think again, to say, that's an example of an initiative that was, by both the retailer and our city archaeologist, and hopefully the inspiration will be there now, and others will do it, and others will follow, and others will see that archaeology is not a dead hand on development site, which is the perception that's sometimes out there.
But it's also about allowing future generations access to the archaeology and to leave it in situ for future generations to interrogate.
Very good. I'm just looking at time here. We've just time for a few more questions. One here for Sabrina. There are many spaces in the inner city. Could these be turned into community gardens and allotments to help with climate change?
That is something, so there are a couple of greening strategies that are going forward that you'll hear probably more about from Les as well. I think the challenge with vacant sites in the city is it's the ownership of the land and who owns it. So that is a bigger discussion, but as John's been saying, if there's ideas that you have or recommendations for how those sites might be used, it is worth putting those suggestions into the development plan so we have a record of it and we're being asked to think about it and consider it.
Sorry?
Yep.
No,
I was just agreeing with Sabrina, and as I said, it is the corollary of a compact city, of bringing more people into the city, of bringing more density into the city as well. The corollary of that, the absolute corollary, is to have high quality green spaces, and those green spaces are not just for multi-purpose, and it touches on what this topic's about. A green space is about biodiversity, it's about carbon sequestration, and it's about food as well, and seeing the joy in seeing kids, seeing carrots grow again or whatever, rather than coming from a supermarket, it's wonderful, and that's to be commended, as well as the recreational aspects of, there's this getting the green blue thing, along our canals, along the Liffey and the Dodder, etc. So it's all of those green things have to be brought together in an integrated, managed way, and that fabric is an essential part of our development plan. And again, any ideas from the public consultation will be welcome.
And how does the panel feel about the vacant property tax? Question has come in here. John, I'm not sure if you want to take that one.
No, the vacant. Well, I without blowing our own trumpet, the City Council was the forefront in proposing the vacant property tax in the first place. I think it's a good idea. It was 3%. I think it's been up down to 7%. It's brought in not in order to punish people, but to ensure that vacant land is brought forward for the uses that we've just described there. So it is a good idea. I can say no more than that. We will keep it under review as to how successful it is, and we would hope that it'll be very successful in bringing forward much needed living accommodation, much needed employment places in the city within, say, the M50, in order to achieve what was mentioned this morning, the national planning framework policy of getting 50% of new growth in the city over the next 10 years within the urban footprint, and that means within the urban footprint means in those brownfield gaps within our area, without eating into our green fields on the edge of the city.
Brilliant stuff. And we've just time, I think, for one or two more questions. Another question here. We can project housing need, but how do we measure the need for certain other types of development in the city, for example, hotels or short-term accommodation? Not sure, maybe John, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, we can do a crude projection of all of those things given the population of a standard city, but Dublin has a specific niche in a city of strong character, therefore attracts more tourists than maybe many other cities. So that needs to be accommodated, but not to an absolute degree to the situation where the balance is upset too much. The similar issue comes up with purpose-built student accommodation. There are student cities in Europe, but the concern in various parts of the city here was there's no over-concentration. There is no mathematical rule by which you can apply those. That is why the making of a development plan is a 2-year process. And we take into consideration all of those aspects that make up the fabric of our city, the mixed use philosophy, how we achieve that, how to get the balance right. So there isn't a mathematical answer to any of those, but we do have to keep we have to welcome students to the city, we have to welcome tourists to the city, but neither's an absolute provision.
Great stuff. Very finally, last question to you, Sabrina, a nice short one for you. What are the most effective ways of addressing climate change in the city?
I think the big one is for each of us to consider our resources and what we use. I think one of the themes in the plan is resource management, and that's for us to consider internally, like our use of water, electricity, waste production, what we're consuming. And I think that's a big one for us, and it hits on a lot of other things. Like sometimes we don't consider waste in the city in terms of illegal dumping, and how that impacts, say, like if we have network flooding, like if somebody throws, improperly disposes of a computer, a TV screen, a couch outside in a back alley, they don't know, they might not have looked at the flood risk map and seen that that's an area that's at flood risk, and then we have a heavy downpour and then somebody's house suddenly is flooded or the street is flooded, and that creates a whole other problem. So I think us considering our waste, asking the questions of, do I need this? Do I need to use, how much am I using? And I think even like a target for us is we do want segregated bins in the city. So recycling, just being mindful of what you're consuming, also taking that split second to think about what bin you're putting it in when we do have those bins out. So just a small plug for our Circle City project. It's only plastic bottles and aluminum cans in those bins, no coffee cups. So just for everybody to kind of think consciously of their resource.
Brilliant stuff. Well, that brings us to the end of our webinar. My thanks to all of our speakers here today, and of course to you for your participation and for asking all of those great questions. A reminder again that you have until February 22nd to make your submission and have your say on the future development of this city. You can do so online or by post. You can log on to the website dublincitydevelopmentplan.ie, read the strategic issues paper and all of its key topics and make your submission. Or you can also have your say by post by writing to the address on screen. And I also want to remind you that today's presentations and indeed all of the public consultation webinars that are taking place this week will all be available to watch back again on the Dublin City Development Plan website. I'll leave you now with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, who once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. Your city matters. Your views matter. So don't be silent. Make a submission and help shape the development of our capital city for future generations." Thank you so much for watching and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.